Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association. Missouri produces wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details on the variety of products made in the state are at choosewood.com.
From St. Louis Public Radio. This is St. Louis on the Air.
If the Senate ends up passing something, even if it's not to the six Democrats' liking, are they going to vote against it and get nothing? I have a hard time believing that.
Yeah, that would be a harder no vote for Cori Bush.
I would think so. Cori Bush did not win the African-American parts of her district when she ran against Lacey Clay, but got, I don't know, between 60 and 70% of the white vote. If she runs for re-election and she's getting above 50% in North St. Louis and North St. Louis County, doesn't matter if the white vote goes down. She wins automatically.
I'm Sarah Fensky. Last night, Congresswoman Cori Bush hosted a town hall for her constituents. The virtual meeting was her first since last Friday's vote against President Joe Biden's infrastructure bill. Bush used the event to push for a bill still under discussion in Congress, the Build Back Better plan, which would spend big money on climate change and social services. But one constituent, who gave her name only as Carolyn, had a question. She wanted to know why Bush wasn't giving the more narrow infrastructure bill that already passed its due. Let's listen to their exchange.
Why are we not talking about the good things that are in the bipartisan infrastructure bill rather than just hyping, I'm sorry I used that word, hyping the Build Back Better? We all would like to see that pass. There's some beautiful things in there. But, I mean, Congresswoman, you even voted no to pass the infrastructure bill, which is great. It's going to help St. Louis. It's going to help a whole lot of cities all over the nation. So why can't we talk more about what's in the Infrastructure Act and then still push for the Build Back Better? I mean, we're laser focused on one, but not the other. And I think it's hurting the Democratic Party.
Well, thank you for the question, Carolyn. So we are, the thing is we have to have both, and we have to talk about both bills. The reason why I think there has been a lot of talk about the Build Back Better Act is because we want people to know that for those that are holding out on that are Democrats, we're asking for the people of their districts to tell them we need this. And it's going to come because when the people that live in those communities say, hey, we need this, then those legislators, they listen to the people, who they're supposed to represent, like we hope.
And that is St. Louis Democratic Congresswoman Cori Bush speaking to a constituent at last night's town hall. Congresswoman Bush also gave an interview about her vote to St. Louis Public Radio political correspondent Jason Rosenbaum, and he joins us today. Jason, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So Congresswoman Bush said in that clip just there, we have to have both bills, but she voted against the infrastructure bill. Is there kind of an inherent contradiction in that?
It depends on who you ask. I wasn't particularly surprised because she had been saying for a while that she wasn't going to vote for the infrastructure bill unless the Build Back Better plan got a vote first. And for our listeners, the Build Back Better plan is this whole reconciliation debate, and it has funding for things like expanding federal money to child care and pre-K and a bunch of environmental programs and expanding the child tax credit into next year. And in her view, that bill will have a more wide-reaching impact on her constituency. The first district is very diverse, and it includes places where I live in Richmond Heights, and it also includes a lot of places with a lot of poverty and a lot of historical disinvestment. So I also think it may be sending a message to the Senate that they have to send back a Build Back Better plan to the House that it's going to be worthwhile. Are the six Democrats that voted against the infrastructure bill are not going to support it.
This is a way of saying you can't take us for granted.
I would think that it's a way to provide some leverage to make sure whatever comes out of the Senate is acceptable. Now, I hate to predict the future here, but if the Senate ends up passing something, even if it's not to the 6 Democrats' liking, are they going to vote against it and get nothing? I have a hard time believing that.
Yeah, that would be a harder no vote for Cori Bush.
I would think so, but I guess it just depends on what the final product is. Like, if it includes a situation that will pay for preschool for lots and lots and lots of people, I mean, that's or it makes daycare more affordable, hypothetically, or it expands that aforementioned family, the tax credit that a lot of people, including myself, are getting. That seems like a win, even if it's not the best deal. Because as everyone knows, it started off as a much larger proposal.
They are chipping away at this thing.
And it got chipped away over time because of Democratic opposition, not only in the Senate with Manchin and Sinema, but also in the House with some quote-unquote more moderate Democrats.
So Cori Bush did have this no vote. We asked people on our St. Louis on the Air Twitter, St. Louis on the Air Facebook, what they thought about it. We heard from a lot of people who feel pretty good about this. Mary writes on Twitter, "I'm grateful for her. She's standing up for the most marginalized and oppressed in our community, and she won't settle for not good enough." Joe also writes on Twitter, "Cori Bush is sending a signal to the Dinos, Democrats in name only, like Sinema and Manchin, that not everyone is going to roll over and watch a human-centered agenda get gutted by corporate interests. They won anyway. They did pass this bill. The price she'll pay is getting primaried by the establishment." Do you think, Jason, that this makes her vulnerable in a primary?
So let me be honest here. There had been talk about a primary against Cori Bush before this vote.
She was going to get primaried no matter what.
And the 2 names that come up are State Senator Steve Roberts and Brian Williams. I think that people that didn't like Cori Bush were looking for any pretext to primary her. And what it comes down to is this. Cori Bush did not win the African-American parts of her district when she ran against Lacey Clay, but got, I don't know, between 60 and 70% of the white vote. If she runs for re-election and she's getting above 50% in North St. Louis and North St. Louis County, doesn't matter if the white vote goes down. She wins automatically. So, and she knows this, and I think that she is going to be able to, in her mind, go to these voters and say, here's all that I've done, and here's all the stances I took even when they were hard. It'll be up to the voters to decide. But, I mean, she has nowhere to go but up compared to her 2020 race, especially with black voters. And if it goes up, it doesn't matter who they put against her; they lose. So I hate to be that blunt, but that's the reality.
Hey, that's why we have you on. We like some bluntness. And speaking of blunt, not only did Congresswoman Cori Bush vote against the infrastructure bill, but Senator Roy Blunt voted for it. Some interesting politics in this state these days. Now, he told KCUR's Steve Kraske that he's been waiting 12 years for an infrastructure bill that goes beyond the bare minimum.
Every 6 months, maybe even more often than that during the Trump administration, we were going to get bipartisan infrastructure was going to be the next thing. During the 8 years of President Obama, we were always about to go to a big bipartisan infrastructure bill, and it just didn't happen. And I think while this bill's not perfect, it's the right thing for our state and the right thing for the country. And I'm glad it's going to head to the president's desk.
And that is Republican Senator Roy Blunt. Jason, that argument that it's not perfect kind of feels like maybe the end of an era for that Senate seat. It's hard to imagine any of his successors taking a similar tone.
No, and it's really interesting to me that the Senate Republicans that voted for this, and Blunt was not the only one. Mitch McConnell voted for this and is actually trumpeting how it's going to be great for Kentucky. It's so stark how people like Blunt are being treated compared to the House Republicans that ended up voting for this. I think the reason why the Bush vote, I mean, it's interesting, but it really wasn't critical, is because 13 Republicans voted for it, which gave the 6 Democrats the ability to do what they did. And there's a lot of Republicans who are furious at those 13 Republicans. And I've read that they've gotten death threats and primary threats. Whereas, honestly, I've been looking at Twitter. There are Democrats who supported the infrastructure bill are honestly pretty happy with Blunt for supporting it and happy with Emmanuel Cleaver. That's kind of the interesting reaction. You mentioned some of the reactions. There are clearly people that support what Congresswoman Bush did. Mm-hmm. There are also people who I think are really aligned, especially with trade unions, that are going to benefit from the infrastructure bill, who are pretty disappointed with her. And Missouri, since we're not a right-to-work state, has pretty powerful labor unions. Now, again, does that matter in a 2022 primary? I don't think so. I think it's dependent on how Cori Bush's constituents decide to vote for her. But it is kind of an example of the strange bedfellows trope that we see in Missouri politics. Like, I don't think you see a lot of labor unions praising Roy Blunt very often, but, this is one of those instances.
Yeah, I like this one because it's just so topsy-turvy. So, St. Louis Public Radio political correspondent Jason Rosenbaum, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
This episode was produced by Jane Mather-Glass, with audio engineering and podcast design by Aaron Dorr and production assistance by Jane. Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer. St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here. If you learned something new from today's episode, consider leaving us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the easiest way to help people discover our show. We appreciate it. Thank you. St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri, St. Louis.
Support comes from Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to sustainable and sound conservation of the state's forests, which support more than 41,000 Missouri jobs, resulting in a $10 billion industry. ChooseWood.com.